Welcome everyone to the October 2022 Textual Study on the Bible and Beyond discussions. I'm your host, Hilary Barner, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Shirley Paulson. I'm also happy to announce that we have a special guest contributor this evening, Dr. Kateusz. Shirley will introduce her more fully when they get going. In this study, we'll be talking about the threat of Mary Magdalene as a leader, why her spiritual strength and leadership role cause problems. We'll take a close look at the Gospel of Mary, paying special attention to the way both Jesus and Mary took on leadership roles, and then considering men's reaction to Mary's leadership. I want to mention, before we turn it over to Shirley, that we encourage and appreciate an ongoing pledge of support via Patreon. We hope that those of you who are already supporting us through Patreon are also enjoying the special videos created for you. If you're not yet signed up, please go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to make a monthly pledge that's just right for you. PayPal or checks are also appreciated, but we're only able to make those little extras available through Patreon. Check the chat box here or the website for details. Thank you so much. And now here's Dr. Shirley Paulson.
Oh, that's great. I am so excited to get to be with you tonight and getting into a discussion this evening. So anyway, I imagine that most of you know something about Mary Magdalene, or you probably would not have joined us. And probably most of you know something about the book that's not in the Bible called The Gospel of Mary. But even if you don't, that's okay, because we're just going to look at the text together and bring our best thinking to it as we go along. So to get us on the same page, we're basically talking about Mary, the one in the Bible who witnessed Jesus's resurrection. You're probably aware that there are lots of people around Jesus whose names were Mary, and it's really hard to get them sorted out. And we're going to talk about that some this evening. But our main focus will be on the Mary in the Gospel of Mary. It's possible, but not guaranteed, that she's the same Mary who witnessed the resurrection of Jesus. And then she may also be the same one who is with some fellow disciples in another ancient text called the Dialogue of the Savior. And then again, this could be the same Mary in the Gospel of Thomas. She could also be the same Mary who anoints Jesus in Bethany. And of course, there's Mary, who is the mother of Jesus. So whether there were multiple Marys or one very prominent Mary, one thing is certain: whoever was associated with the Mary at the scene of the resurrection and in the Gospel of Mary was an extremely important person involved with Jesus and his followers. So before we dig into the specific Gospel of Mary, I want to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Dr. Kateusz. She is because she's going to talk next. Anyway, I want you to know that she is a research associate with Wingard's Institute for Catholic Research. And she studies the intersection of religion and women in text and art during early Christianity. So I asked if she'd come and give us a visual tour related to Mary, whoever that is, just to help us get our bearings with what we do and don't know about Mary. So I'm grateful to you, Ali, for coming to share this with us, because even though we're basically a textual studies group, I think we need to remember that the artwork is an essential historical record that complements what we find in the text. In fact, we really need both text and artwork to get a clearer picture.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley. I am feel very privileged to be invited here again, and I'm looking forward to everything you have to say. Excellent introduction, by the way. So, I hope I can meet what you're asking for with respect to the portraits of Mary, because in early Christian art, it's rather difficult to find anything identified as Mary Magdalene. And so I'm going to start a little show, and I'm going to identify what I think is the very earliest depiction of Mary Magdalene by herself with the risen Christ at the tomb. And then we'll see why it's kind of complexified.
Oh, great. I can't wait.
Okay, so I'm as we're looking for Mary Magdalene in early Christian art, I'm going to talk about this particular portrait. So I know last week, I believe it was last week, that you all talked about or were shown the Dura Europa's baptistry wall painting, which many art historians, although not all, there are other interpretations, identify this as the women coming to the tomb. And in fact, that was the very earliest identification of it by the people who were actually on site excavating here. And this is a drawing made in situ. So it's, when you have women coming to a tomb-like structure, which looks kind of like depictions of the Marys in later art, it's not that hard to imagine that actually this is a depiction of the women going to the tomb. One of the things I think makes it difficult for some people to identify is that it's monumental. It's much larger than any depiction of Jesus in this baptistry. It's huge. And it's right beside the font itself, which interestingly was constructed to look like about the exact same shape and size and color as a sarcophagus. So the sarcophagus and the tomb, but the women are huge around this baptistry. So if we think about Mary at Magdalene alone with the risen Jesus, so we saw Mary, presumably the leader of the women going to the tomb at the Dura Europa's baptistry, but Mary in John 20 is alone with Jesus she's alone at the empty tomb, and then she finds Jesus, or Jesus finds her, and he says, Mary, and then she recognizes him. And then he strangely asks her not to hold on to him because he says he must ascend. So she's apparently holding on to him. And Jesus sends Mary to tell the other disciples the good news. So this is a key leadership scene in John 20 for Mary Magdalene, because Jesus gives her the commission to go tell the men in particular, but presumably other women disciples as well, that he has risen. So she's basically teaching the men who eventually are going to be assumed to be bishops. So she must be the bishop of the bishops, right? Okay, so the scene is on this sarcophagus called the Sarcophagus of Two Brothers, which was carved sometime between 325 and 350, and today is in the Vatican Museum. This particular scene is what we're going to look at. And there are other scenes on the sarcophagus of Jesus, such as this one of Jesus blessing the loaves and the fish. And this is a close-up of the scene. So we see an empty tomb, and it seems to have been constructed so that you can see right through it. This is a very finely carved sarcophagus. It's one of the jewels of it always has pride of place in the Vatican. It's set out where you cannot miss it. It's exquisitely carved, and it's in extremely good condition. So it looks as if it has been carved as an empty tomb. You can see right through it. And here Jesus is facing Mary. And this woman is always identified as a Mary. And Mary holds on to his hand. The Vatican and virtually all art historians identify this scene as a scene of the raising of Lazarus, however. So let's take a look at scenes of the raising of Lazarus and see why it might have been identified that way and why it might not perhaps should be identified that way. So I'm going to show 3 different scenes which are fairly typical. This is a scene of the raising of Lazarus, and it has some similarities. It has Jesus, Mary, and a tomb. Some differences, though, is that Lazarus is in the tomb. Jesus faces the tomb. Jesus has a wand or a staff, which is kind of called which you see a lot in early Christian sarcophagus art or other art as well of Jesus, where he's got a wand almost that he's doing a miracle with. It's really common. And then you have this woman at his feet, a rather small woman. And this is in line with John 11:32, which says Mary fell at his feet. And here's another example. Lazarus in the tomb. Well, he's not facing his body's facing the tomb, but he's kind of looking away. He's got a wand and Mary's at his feet. And here's another. This one's kind of interesting though, because it's a little bit of a composite between the two scenes, because if you look here quite carefully, it looks like, and I believe this is the case, that this Lazarus is a later addition. So he may have had an empty tomb here. And also, Jesus doesn't have a wand, he has a scroll, which makes it a bit atypical. So here we have, so the differences with the scene of the raising of Lazarus and this scene is we have a clearly empty tomb. Jesus faces away from the tomb. Jesus has no wand. He doesn't have a scroll either. Mary stands. She's not at his feet, and she's holding on to him. And Mary is larger than any of the depictions of Mary of Bethany, for the most part. So this larger piece is interesting because there's an article that came out late last year by Elizabeth Schrader and Joan Taylor, where they really argued that Magdala was not a proper meaning for Magdalene. It should never be translated that way, essentially. And that is because, well, in the first place, Magdala was not even known as a name for a town until centuries after Mary and Jesus were around. Not until the 5th century is it clearly identified as a town, the town that we see now when we go there. And Magdalene was more likely a nickname or an honorific. Like Peter was called the Rock. The best, closest meaning they can come for the Magdalene in Aramaic would be Peter was called Cephas, meaning the rock. Mary was called the magnified one, or perhaps the toweress. But here, the magnified one, Mary's larger. So whereas she's perhaps by her presence in this scene and her touching the Christ, maybe she's been made larger, or maybe she's just larger because she's a leader. In any case, in this scene, she's definitely larger. And just does it signify she's the magnified one, Magdalene? And it appears to me there may be some conflation of scenes of Mary of Bethany, Mary of Magdalene. So here Jesus didn't hold the wand. Not sure that Lazarus was ever in the empty tomb. And I think there's a handful of these that Lazarus may not have been in the tomb. But because Mary's at Jesus's feet, it's for that reason, I think, always identified as the raising of Lazarus. And Lazarus, of a little mummy, Lazarus is wrapped in a shroud, is always placed in the tomb. Whereas on this one, it's rather clear that it is those markers aren't there, indicating it's Mary Bethany, even though that's been sort of the best guess, the easy guess. So my question then becomes, some 4th century artists appear to have conflated scenes depicting, or some scenes depicting Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene. So does this suggest Mary Magdalene's leadership was considered a threat in some circles? Or was it perhaps something else? For example, Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany were actually intended to be seen as the same person.
Ooh. What a great question, Ellie. Is that where you're leaving us?
Yes, I'm leaving you there. So.
All right. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's great that you were able to help us understand some of the complexities and challenges in trying to identify Mary, and understand that you can't just read a story or a fairy tale about Mary and figure it all out. There are all kinds of complex issues. And it has a lot to do with leadership and authority and the role of women, and why was she always bowing down, and all these questions come together. So thank you so much for sharing that and getting us started on this amazing quest here. So now we're going to turn to the text, and I'm going to show you a series of little phrases from the text of the Gospel of Mary, and then we'll ask each other some questions. So here's where I'm going to ask for participation among you. Before I share my screen to show you, I just want to also make sure that you know a little bit about the Gospel of Mary. Obviously, it's not in the Bible, and so for a long time, people haven't really known that it even existed until it was discovered in the 19th century. It's not part of the Nag Hammadi collection, but it is considered one of those, questionable texts just because it wasn't in the Bible for some reason. Now, we may guess why it's not in the Bible. I mean, certainly it talks about the leadership of women, which was not comfortable for the later church. But, we're not going to really go there tonight. I'm just going to talk a little more about the text itself and what is it telling us about Mary and the issues of leadership of the day and what it means to us today. I'm going to ask a series of questions that go with these. I have like 4 little passages, and what I'd like to do is have you take turns reading them. So the first question I'd like to ask before we read these 4 is, what concepts of leadership do you see in the following texts? So we'll read them all through, and then we'll talk about them one at a time.
Will matter then be utterly destroyed or not? The Savior replied, anyone with 2 ears able to hear should listen.
All right, and before we go on to the next one, I want to make sure that you know that what's happening here is that there's a conversation going on between the Savior, probably Jesus, and some of his disciples. We know some of them who are gathered together there. That would be Peter and Andrew and Levi and Mary, all considered disciples together. There were probably more, but anyway, this is the conversation going on, and somebody asked this question that Peggy just read. Okay, number 2.
When the Blessed One had said these things, he greeted them all. Peace be with you, he said. Acquire my peace within yourselves.
Richard's trying the old-fashioned way. He's just got his hand up waving.
Okay, great.
Okay, we have some hands now. How about Carol Phillips?
Okay. The Blessed One continues, do not lie down any rule beyond what I determined for you, nor promulgate law like the lawgiver, or else you might be dominated by it.
Okay, and Richard, why don't you go ahead?
After he had said these things, he departed from them. But they were distressed and wept greatly. If they did not spare him, how will they spare us? Then Mary stood up.
All right. Thank you, the 4 of you, for getting us into this text here. So we've seen this scene here. This is the beginning of the Gospel of Mary, where they're gathered together. The Savior is giving them instructions and teaching them. And this is what has happened there. So let's just have some comments then about what you think about these, either 1, 2, 3, or 4. What does it tell you about leadership? So now I do see Richard's hand there. So go ahead, Richard, and tell us what you think.
I have a question before we answer that question.
Okay, sure. Okay.
I'm sure the documents they found were not written in English. Could you tell us what language they were and who translated them? And then we can get to your question. I'd appreciate that.
Right. All right. Well, so the fullest copy we have is in Coptic, which was probably copied from the Greek. There is another Greek version that's smaller than what we have in the Coptic. So this one is the one we're reading from is mostly translated from the Greek one. So great. Okay, so does anybody have any thoughts about what does this tell us about just ideas of leadership? Maybe I can get you started while people are thinking about this. It seems to me that this question about will matter then be utterly destroyed, and the Savior says anyone with 2 ears ought to be able to hear this. Should be listening. It sounds like he is insisting that people have to understand what he's doing, that he's asking a very profound question, and he's affirming that they better understand what he's saying. So it sounds to me like he's pretty authoritarian in this particular passage. But then, of course, in the next one, he's saying, peace be with you, acquire my peace. So again, I think he's speaking with authority, but also insisting on their having peace. All right, anybody else have thoughts about these?
This is Carla. I'm gonna put my hand up.
Good.
Well, first, my question is, it kind of begs the question in that first one. So how is that authoritative?
I think of it, thank you for asking the question. I think of it as saying that he's, you're right, that he's sort of insisting that they better just pay attention, because he's got the answers. And so anybody with 2 ears to hear should listen. He's the one who's going to tell them the important answer.
Okay, so even though the Savior doesn't actually answer the question, he's saying, just listen to me. Is that it?
He said, yeah, I think so. I think he's commanding the stage.
Okay, gotcha.
And the fact that he's telling people, acquire my peace. Like, I've got it for you. I'm the one who has it. So get it from me. I think that's the way it sounds to me that way. But we're all reading these things together. So I think we're just interpreting together.
I'm wondering, while I hear the authoritarianism, he also is an equal access boss. Everybody can hear this. Everybody acquire my peace, which is a different kind of leadership. It's a more horizontal, it seems to me, leadership.
And he does say anybody with 2 ears. So he's kind of implying most people have 2 ears. Good point.
I have a question. This is, are all these sayings together? I mean, there's nothing in between showing that they're continuous or not?
No, they are separated. I pulled out the passages that I thought related to leadership, but there are other things in between, because I don't have the whole gospel in here tonight. These are just the first. Okay. They are in order, so they. I'm not skipping around, but I did skip passages. Yes.
So in other words, this is, you just pull these out, and they're not supposed to be in reference to each other.
Not necessarily. Right. That's right.
So this is Joy. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Joy.
In number 3, I like reading that. It seems to me that when a leader comes up, they don't rely on the established rules that are all set down. It seemed like when Jesus came, he kind of went against rules that were set up by the lawgivers, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He didn't, and he was explaining that he wasn't against what they were teaching. He was just kind of against all the rules. And I like that, because I think he's saying, do it kind of the way I was doing it, where you don't start setting up rules. And I find that I see that this is a sad thing in a lot of religions, is that rules and traditions and rituals start coming in and kind of being the dominant thing. And so I'm not sure we are really following what the Savior said.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point, Joy.
This is Diana again. I can continue with that thought. It's like he doesn't want a ritual in terms of approaching our religion or our concepts of God and his Christ. He wants us to listen. It sounds like, especially says anyone with 2 ears here should listen. And he's saying, listen.
Very good.
Listen. Hey, that's a hard.
All right, we're going to move on to the next section, which is about the evidence of leadership in Mary. If I can get my, there we go. Okay, so this is about Mary, and I want to have 4 more readers again. So Hillary, you can go ahead and pick on readers.
Okay, we have Joy.
Okay, I meant to take my hand down, but anyway.
We got
After Mary stood up and greeted them, she tenderly kissed them all and said, "Brothers and sisters, do not weep. Do not be distressed nor in doubt, for his grace will be with you, sheltering you."
Okay, number 2.
Okay, we have Katie Brown.
Mary continues speaking. He has united us and made us true human beings.
And number 3.
Don't have any more hands at the moment.
Okay, well then Hillary, you go ahead.
We got Lisa. Lisa's raised her hand.
Okay.
When Mary said these things, she turned their mind toward the good, and they began to debate about the sayings of the Savior.
Wait a second here. Okay. All right. And number 4.
Okay, I don't have anybody. So Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that you were greatly loved by the Savior as no other woman. Therefore, tell us those words of the Savior, which you know, but which we haven't heard."
All right. This should be pretty strong statement here about leadership. Let's hear some comments about leadership now, especially particularly pertaining to Mary. What evidence of leadership do you see in Mary?
Well, Mary stands up, for one thing, and then she kisses them. So she brings attention to herself in a very loving way. And she gives them words of comfort, telling them not to weep and not to be distressed, nor to be in doubt. And of course, then she says, I'm on number 1, of course, for his grace will be with you, sheltering you. So she is comforting them and encouraging them.
I like that she's turned their mind toward the good. I love that.
Their mind. That's leadership, isn't it?
Honor has her hand up.
It seems to me that all the remarks that she has made in these 4 verses indicate that she has a very calm confidence in her understanding of what he is teaching and is expecting of them. And she's very kind about it. And they seem to be receptive to it. They, meaning whoever else is there, the only one named is Peter.
Mm-hmm.
But he isn't saying, "Who do you think you are telling us these things?" He says, "We know you were greatly loved, and please tell us more."
Yeah, and it's interesting how they are conveying some humility before her here. You know, tell us what you know that we haven't heard. So there is an honoring and a respect for her going on here, isn't there? All right, any more comments on this one? Oh yeah, I see some more hands here. Let's see.
Sharon?
Here, to me, the disciples know that she spent a lot of time with Jesus, and Jesus more than likely told her a lot of things that he did not tell them. And this kind of shows where it says, therefore tell us those words of the Savior, which you know, but we have not heard. So that kind of places her, I don't want to say as somebody special, but he shared with her more often than he did with the disciples. And he told her things that more than likely the disciples would not understand, but she would.
So she's leaning on, she's drawing on her authority from her relationship to the master, and she's exercising it, isn't she? And they're acknowledging it.
Correct.
Right. Thank you. Any more comments? I think so.
We got Shannon and then Richard.
Okay.
She was reminding them what was true and what they already knew, but were distracted and seemed to forget. But she was reminding them, leading them back to what they already knew it was true and they experienced. So then they began to debate about the sayings of the Savior and remember what they knew.
That's an interesting point about leadership there, is to not knock over their heads about what they know, but rather she's bringing out what they should know themselves, reminding them. That's an interesting point about leadership. Any more here?
Richard.
When I just feel like when there's a real genuine humility being expressed, and that first line there, as well as through the whole thing, to me, there's a profound spiritual boldness that comes across. Do not weep. Do not be distressed, nor be in doubt, for his grace will be with you, sheltering you. I just find that incredibly strong, coming from somebody extremely humble too.
Yeah.
So I think those are profound leadership qualities that I see.
Beautiful. Thank you. This is interesting. This is why I like to have a group discussion, because we see it from so many different lenses that help all of us see it better. So thank you, all of you, for this. We're going to move on to the next set of 4 questions. I think I am anyway. Let me just see here. There we go. Okay. All right. Now at this point, we're moving into what she's explaining to them, what she actually heard from the Savior. And so the story there is that she's explaining how there's a way of moving upward. Your soul moves up out of the trials and tribulations of human existence into a more spiritual awareness or spiritual presence. And so the interesting part about this is this is the very place where part of the text is missing from all the text that we have about Mary Magdalene. This section is missing. Now, who knows if somebody took it out? I'd love to get Allie's thoughts about this, why this text would be missing. She's a great sleuth. But at any rate, it picks up here where Mary is explaining what happens to the soul as it moves upward and confronts different kinds of qualities of thought along the way. So again, Hillary, we need 4 more readers.
I don't see any volunteers. Oh, there we got one. Katie.
There you go. Desire said to the soul, "Why do you lie, since you belong to me?" The soul answered, "I saw you. You did not see me, nor did you know me. You mistook the garment I wore for my true self, and you did not recognize me."
Okay, that's a lot to take in there. So desire is one of the challenges to the soul, saying, I don't think you can get past me. I'm going to not let you pass by me, soul. And soul says, desire says, why are you lying to me? And of course, the soul answers, I did see you. You just don't know who I am. I'm paraphrasing, of course. All right, then number 2, we're going to have ignorance talking to soul. So who's going to be ignorance?
Carol Phillips.
Okay.
Ignorance said to the soul, "Where are you going? You are bound by wickedness. Indeed, you are bound. Do not judge." And the soul said, "Why do you judge me, since I have not passed judgment?"
Okay, so there again, we have another thing that's trying to keep the soul from moving upward. And so ignorance is saying, you can't get past me because, you're judging and you can't judge. And of course, the soul says, well, why are you judging me? I haven't judged. So I know what I know, and I'm not ignorant. So the soul is confronting all the opposition to moving forward. All right, number 3. Who's ready for number 3?
We've got Joy Schwenker.
Great. Okay, go ahead, Joy.
The 7 powers of wrath interrogated the soul. Where are...
I'm sorry, that's supposed to be where are you coming from? That's my type.
Okay, okay. I figured it wasn't supposed to be a period and a capital.
Yeah, sorry.
Where are you coming from, human killer? And where are you going, space conqueror? The soul replied, what binds me has been slain. My desire has been brought to an end, and ignorance has died.
All right, so here we moved on upward, and the 7 powers of wrath are saying to the soul, what are you doing here? And so, and accusing the soul of being a human killer and a space conqueror, And the soul says, what binds me has already been shut down because I've shut down ignorance and I have the freedom to go forward. You cannot stop me. Wrath, I have the authority to keep moving. All right, number 4. Who's ready for number 4?
We've got Sharon Thompson.
Okay.
The soul continued from this hour on for the time of the due season of the, is that era?
The eon.
Eon. Okay. I will receive rest and silence. And Mary had said these things. She was silent. Since it was up to this point that the Savior had spoken to her.
All right, so this is as far as Mary goes then. She's saying that for the time of due season of the eon, I will receive rest in silence. So in other words, rest in silence is a way of saying, I've completed the journey. I'm where I'm supposed to go. And she's accomplished the task of moving past all of the opposition to her spiritual authority. And I'm saying her, it only says the soul. And so Mary's the one who's telling the story that Jesus taught to her about what the soul has to do. So that this is the teaching that Mary had learned that she's repeating to the disciples at this point. All right, so here's the question now. How do you see leadership in this recounting of the how the soul is going to move forward? How do you see leadership in this? Any thoughts of this?
It's Carol. Do I understand that these are Jesus's teachings to her to how to respond to the temptations?
Evidently, these are the actual words in the text, so it doesn't say that, but I think we assume that to be the case.
Okay. And your basic question was?
Okay, the basic question is, how does this tell us something about Mary's leadership?
Well, I certainly think the fact that he is revealing or encouraging her or teaching her how to deal with these temptations, that he's instilling the qualities of leadership, the ability to learn and to understand and to do.
Great, yeah.
I think also there's nothing demure about this. She is really preaching it, giving it.
Yeah, she certainly speaks with great authority here about how the soul has authority over all these things that would say, no, you can't. Yeah, great.
Richard's got his hand up.
Go ahead,
It shows what profound knowledge has been imparted to her. And I think that's another characteristic of leadership, that leaders know.
Yeah. And also the people, the master would have imparted this very important knowledge to someone who can be entrusted with it. Yeah. Any more thoughts about that before we go on? Joy, do you have your hand up for this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. It says a lot about her leadership that she's the one doing the talking, because, in the Bible, we just don't get that from the women.
Right.
It's the men that are doing the preaching. It's the men that are the leaders for the most part. And so and obviously in the Gospels, we don't get this about Mary. And so I just think it's amazing that she's the one, and that they're listening, that they're respecting what she says, and they're asking for it. I think it says a lot about leadership.
Yeah. So, and that's right. I mean, it's so right that the women are not given any speaking parts, and that's a very important indication of leadership. The fact that she's actually doing the speaking and representing the master's voice.
Shirley?
Yes.
This is Joan.
Hi, how are you doing?
I don't know if this means anything, but the third one, the 7 powers of wrath, interrogated the soul made me think of the fact that Jesus had cast out 7 devils from Mary.
Oh,
And if there's any connection to her questions or what he talked to her about, I wonder, just made me think of that.
That's a very interesting point there. Yeah. The 7 devils or the 7 powers of wrath. We don't, because it doesn't say in the canon what 7 devils have been cast out. So that's a very good question. All right, I'm going to move on to the next section too. You're doing great with these. This is lots of fun to hear from you.
Just a quick question. The 7 devils, is that any connection to the 7 deadly sins, or is that just a literary thing?
Well, the seven deadly sins that come from a reading later. But and Al, again, if you're there, if you want to answer this better than I, because you know that the teaching about the Catholic teaching better than I do. But as far as I know, the 7 deadly sins come later, and we just know that Mary Magdalene, that Jesus cast out 7 devils from Mary. So who knows what they are? But you're right. It's worth making a connection here that it could be these 7. Okay, now next section here. We need 4 more readers. This is a response to what Mary said.
Okay, we just got Carla Valance.
Great.
Mary wept and said to Peter, my brother Peter, what are you imagining? Do you think I've thought up these things by myself in my heart, or that I'm telling lies about the Savior?
Okay, and number 2?
We got Claire Turner.
Levi answered, speaking to Peter, Peter, you have always been a wrathful person. Now I see you contending against the woman like the adversaries.
Number 3.
And we've got Richard.
Levi continued, if the Savior made her worthy, who are you then for your part to reject her?
Yeah. And number 4.
Katie?
Levi continued, rather we should be ashamed. We should clothe ourselves with the perfect human, acquire it for ourselves as he commanded us.
Okay, so this is the grand finale of the book here, because what happened after Mary did her teaching was that Peter and Andrew got really upset and said, why do we have to go along with her? Why is she telling us these things? We don't have to listen to a woman. Jesus, I mean, our master wouldn't have given a secret to her and not us. So they're really upset now. And so Mary's weeping and says to Peter, why are you imagining these horrible things? What do you think I'm doing? I'm doing what you asked me to do. And Levi's getting upset too. Levi's getting upset with Peter, saying, Peter, you've been a wrathful person. Why are you doing this? Now, I think what's intriguing about Levi here is that Levi is pointing out the problem that Peter has always been a wrathful person. Where did we see wrath a minute ago? Go ahead. If anybody has some comments, go ahead and say something.
Those 7 wrathful things to challenge the Savior.
Yeah. So we just saw that wrath, the seven, what were they of wrath? Were the part of the last enemy for the soul to be able to go forward. And so Peter hasn't gotten past the wrath part. He's still angry. And so he can't deal with Mary's leadership. So Levi is saying, okay, think about this. If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? And then Levi's conclusion is, wow, we should be ashamed of what we're doing and thinking here, because attacking her, what we should do is clothe ourselves with the perfect human, which is what he taught them to do, the master taught them to do,
perfect,
and acquire it for themselves as he commanded. So, all right, any comments about this? Carol, you're on. Do you want to say something about this? You're on my screen anyway.
Oh, Amy. No, actually, part of mine was just a separate question. Levi is another name for which of the disciples?
Well,
or is that a question mark one?
No, let's see, Levi. I think he's often
Matt.
He's often associated with Matthew.
Matthew.
Many of the extra canonical texts, he's just Levi. So, yeah.
And we've got Joy Schwenker has her hand up.
I do. Wasn't it back in the first slide where Peter turned to Mary and said, he talked to you more than he did to us, and he was actually asking her for more insight?
Exactly. That's
and
exactly.
So then he turns against her here at the end.
Yeah, and so that's what's an interesting question about Mary and her leadership. And the title of our topic tonight is the threat of Mary Magdalene as leader. So my question now to you is, having gone through the story here, is why did Peter feel threatened by Mary's leadership?
Jealousy.
We can go to Sharon.
Okay.
Okay. We have to think back in that time of the day that men were the main characters or the main people, that women, were really not allowed to speak of this. And the disciples, being human, I mean, they questioned Jesus a lot on the things that he said. And I can kind of understand, because this is the first woman that is stepping out in faith. And the men are, they're saying, hey, this has never happened before. Why, what makes you do this authority?
That's a really good point here, is that we really have to read the context of what was going on then. Thank you. To understand what's going on in the story, we have to understand what they were thinking about men and women. And you're quite right that women were not considered to be fully human. So for Mary to carry on with this authority and this leadership directly from their master, that they all agreed was their master, was probably pretty challenging.
Okay, Shirley, we've got Toto back with a hand up.
Go ahead, Toto, give it a try.
Oh, there. Now the microphone's on.
Okay.
Sure. I'm sorry. I was thinking of, it reminded me of the Gospel of Thomas as well, where Peter really was the one who kind of felt threatened, with Mary at the very end.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just think it's interesting that it repeats, this line of, it becomes obvious that Peter really didn't have the heart, right, to hear, because he keeps hearing the words, but it feels like he's not really hearing what Jesus is saying with those spiritual ears that Mary gets quite clearly.
I think you're getting at a really important point there, and that's kind of what I was saying also in this question of leadership. It's not just being a boss or being bullied. There's an authority that comes from a spiritual awareness. And I think it's bothering Peter that he doesn't have it, and he knows he doesn't have it. And so somebody who, I forget who was a moment ago, who mentioned that they're just human. And Levi makes the point at the very end here, we should clothe ourselves with a perfect human. And that's capitalized. That's the way Karen King translates that word, to show that it's not quite the same thing as everyday human, but there's something special about this kind of human. It means to be the perfect child of God that we all have within us. And that's what the master was teaching them to do, rather than getting stuck in their roles before they made that ascension through those different forms of opposition. So there is a real spiritual dimension to this that you can't I don't think you can fully understand the Gospel of Mary without seeing the spiritual action that is playing again in both Peter and in Mary here. Thank you so much for that, Toto.
Well, as I look at an overview of all the things that we've read, in the beginning, it appeared that Mary was accepted as part of the group.
Yeah.
That seemed like a very friendly, straightforward conversation.
Yeah.
And she is asked to share anything that she might have learned that they haven't. And then when she does, it's pretty deep. And as Shirley said, perhaps Peter felt miffed that A, it was pretty deep, B, it hadn't been told to him, and C, he didn't quite get it at this point either. So that probably inflames his animosity to some degree. And I think when it comes to talking about authority, leadership, that Levi really takes a very fine leadership position here.
Yeah.
In speaking back to Peter and pointing out to him that he has some mental improving to do.
Right.
And his last point there in verse 4, we should clothe ourselves with the perfect human. To me, that harks back to the screen where Mary mentioned desire and wrath and seven evil things, whatever it was, and is showing how the soul, I suppose the essence of the individual, is to rise up against those and delete them from their memory banks, and in that way be what the text there calls a perfect human, but what mostly in our familiar King James Bible, it is talking about man, or the child of God or something like that.
Yeah.
Just really quick, Shirley. I think we have to step back with this document and realize that, like the beloved disciple and Peter in the Gospel of John, Mary and Peter in the Gospel of Philip represent something larger than their own individual selves. That it represents the tension in the 2nd, 3rd century when I think these came about, where there was an apostolic, almost becoming Orthodox community. And then there was the community that was represented by Mary, just like in the Gospel of John, there was the Peter tension with the disciple, which represented a very unique community that was not quite Orthodox. And so Mary is really making a case, or Mary is, but it's making a case for this community and this very insightful spiritual aspect of what she's presenting here as something that's a little bit different than Peter, and that there might be literally historic tension between these two communities, and that it's played out in the way this gospel is told.
Beautifully told, Helen. Thank you. I'm so glad that Hillary found you there, because I didn't see you there. So thank you so much.
My hand keeps disappearing.
Oh no! I'm glad you had the authority to stick with it, Helen, and bring your hand up. But that's such a very important point. That's one of the reasons I wanted Allie to come on to talk to us about the ambiguities of who Mary is, what she represents, and we don't really. There's not any such thing as like a story of Mary, but we're reading of this particular explanation about Mary in the context of a community conversation. So thank you so much for bringing that up and concluding for us with that, Helen. I appreciate that so much. All right, I hope that your appetite is whetted to do your own studying some more. And the Gospel of Mary is not that long. You can probably read it and think about it some more. And I hope you keep on thinking, especially about this question of leadership. It's a wonderfully rich topic for us. So I want to thank Allie, especially for being with us tonight, and thank all the rest of you too. And I just one little word about next month. Next month, we're going to talk about Noria, who is one of the female saviors. If you don't know Noria, please come back and find out all about her next month. I'll be sending out a little more information as we go along.
Okay, thank you everybody for your participation. This was the October 2022 textual study on the Bible and beyond discussions on the thread of Mary Magdalene as a leader, led by Dr. Shirley Paulson with guest contributor Dr. Kateusz. Once a month from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the fourth Monday of the month, we provide a discussion of one or more of the early Christian texts. One of our knowledgeable scholars leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of these early Christian texts and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. We do rely on your donations to be able to produce these textual studies. And we're so grateful to those of you who've already pledged your support via Patreon. If you haven't become a subscriber yet, please do go to patreon.com/BibleandBeyond to make a monthly pledge. PayPal or a check is also an option that we certainly appreciate, but please realize they don't give you access to the extras we can provide on Patreon. Check the website earlychristiantext.com for details. Thank you so much.